So now Esther has taken center stage. Up until this point in the story, our cast of supporting characters have been stealing the spotlight. But now it's Esther's turn to show us her true strength and resourcefulness. The queen has put a plan in place and approached the king, but we do not yet know exactly what she intends to do. And so we read on, verses 4 through 8. Esther said, "Let the king, together with Haman, come today to a banquet I have prepared for him." "Bring Haman at once," the king said, "so that we may do what Esther asks." So the king and Haman went to the banquet Esther had prepared. As they were drinking wine, the king again asked Esther, "Now what is your petition? It will be given you. And what is your request? Even up to half the kingdom it will be granted." Esther replied, "My petition and my request is this. If the king regards me with favor, and if it pleases the king to grant my petition and fulfill my request, let the king and Haman come tomorrow to the banquet I will prepare for them. Then I will answer the king's question." So apparently Esther is keeping her cards pretty close to her chest. She has a plan, but it requires a bit of patience. She's slowly moving her chess pieces into place, but waiting to attack, or rather waiting to ask for what she really wants. You see, because Esther must first lay the groundwork. She must circumvent any suspicions these men might have and create an inviting environment, because it was not permissible or proper for a woman, even the queen, to interfere in the political affairs of the empire. And so Esther had to be smart about it. And so knowing that her interest in such things might cause concern, Esther discerningly and deliberately delivered the only things these two selfish and sinful men were interested in: unearned honor and excessive drinking. After 3 days of prayer and discernment, Esther's fasting has turned to feasting, literally, and for good reason. You see, because as we observed in the first chapter of our story, banquets, parties, and excessive drinking was how you got the king's attention. As an overprivileged playboy, the only way King Xerxes knew how to make friends and influence others was through feasting and festivities. These were the qualities and characteristics of his leadership. And Esther knew this, and so she used this in hopes that something meaningful might actually come of it. But that's not all Esther was counting on, because apparently she was also a student of the human condition. And Esther, knowing Haman was a man of unearned honor, rightly assumed that he would be distracted by the pleasure and privilege of her banquet. Which is exactly what happened. Haman thought nothing could be better, no one could be greater. He was now not only the highest ranking official in the king's court, but he had been invited to a private banquet with the queen. I mean, who's got two thumbs and thinks he's the man? This guy. But alas, Haman's high would be short-lived. On his way home that evening, Haman encountered Mordecai and was once again filled with hatred and rage. And so Haman stumbles home to blow off some steam and to commiserate with his wife and closest friends, who in reply to Haman's huffing and puffing, devise a rather outrageous evil scheme. Verses 11 to 14. Haman boasted to his friends about his vast wealth, his many sons, and all the ways the king had honored him, and how he had elevated him above the other nobles and officials. "And that's not all," Haman added. "I'm the only person Queen Esther invited to accompany the king to the banquet she gave, and she has invited me along with the king tomorrow. But all this gives me no satisfaction as long as I see that Jew Mordecai sitting at the king's gate." His wife Zeresh and all his friends said to him, "Have a pole set up, reaching to the height of 50 cubits, 23 meters or 75 feet, and ask the king in the morning to have Mordecai impaled on it. Then go with the king to the banquet and enjoy yourself." This suggestion delighted Haman, and he had the pole set up. Did you catch that? 23 meters or 75 feet high. In a drunken stupor, Haman and his posse of evil misfits think the easiest way to rid themselves of Mordecai is to have him impaled on a pole that is 75 feet high, which is the equivalent of a 7-story building. Hey, Haman, overcompensating much? So once again, as we reach the end of chapter 5, we're reminded that this story is a work of theatricality and a comedy of errors. Outrageous and outlandish behavior is all part and parcel of this tale. And yet, something much more serious and significant is taking place here. You see, because between Esther's subversive and discerning actions and Haman's downward spiral of evil schemes, what we're about to discover is that an unprecedented series of coincidences or divinely orchestrated events have now been set in motion as we take a step towards our climactic conclusion.
Next time on Esther in Isolation.
After Queen Esther's first banquet, King Xerxes can't sleep, and Haman can't help himself. King Xerxes, on the other hand, now knows that something must be done to honor the man who saved his life. And so our theatrical story starts to come together in a scene of divine irony.